All right, everyone, get ready for another deep dive. We're going to really explore Thibaut Meurisse's Master Your Emotions today.
Oh, it's a good one.
I'm already so intrigued, and we've got you here to help us make sense of it all. So,
Yeah, happy to be here and share what I've learned.
Meurisse spends some time talking about this idea of our survival mechanism, which is so interesting, like how we're basically programmed to focus on all the negative stuff, like our brains are stuck back in the Stone Age or something, still looking out for saber-toothed tigers.
Right, yeah, constantly scanning for danger.
But then he goes on to say that we can actually learn to manage this, which is so empowering.
Yeah, it is empowering to realize we have more control than we think.
So what are your thoughts on that? Like this idea that we can kind of rewire our brains to not be so negative?
Well, it's fascinating to see how that ancient wiring still affects us today. You know,
Yeah.
we're overwhelmed with information constantly.
Right.
And it's like our brains just naturally cling to the bad stuff.
That's so true. Like, think about it. Bad news always seems to hit us harder than good news.
Absolutely.
I mean, Meurisse even talks about Elon Musk, having that very public meltdown a while back.
Oh, right.
And it was such a stark reminder that even someone like him, who seems to have it all, can still get hit with these primal, emotional waves.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point.
Yeah.
It shows us that these emotions, even the ones we tend to label as negative, are actually a universal human experience. It doesn't matter who you are, you're going to feel anxious sometimes, overwhelmed, maybe even depressed.
Totally.
Accepting that is a huge part of mastering our emotions, wouldn't you say?
100%. It's like we're all learning to surf those waves
I love that about it.
instead of getting knocked down and pulled under by them.
Yeah, and mastering our emotions is a skill, just like surfing. It takes time and practice.
Speaking of practice, Meurisse talks about all these factors that can impact our emotional state. And some are pretty obvious, like sleep, what we eat, how much we exercise.
The classic, garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly. But then he also talks about the power of our words, which I found really interesting.
Oh, yeah, that's a powerful one.
He even says that using phrases like, I will, instead of I'll try, can actually affect our confidence levels.
It's like the words we use can actually shape how we feel.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to that connection between our thoughts, our words, and then our emotions.
Yeah.
It's a chain reaction. You have a thought that leads to a word, and then boom, you've got an emotion.
Makes total sense. We're actually reprogramming our inner dialogue to create a more positive, emotional landscape for ourselves.
Exactly, yeah. And that kind of ties into another idea from the book, the whole concept of the monkey mind.
Oh, yeah.
Meurisse borrows that from Buddhism, and it refers to, the tendency of our minds to constantly jump from one thought to the next.
Yeah, I know that monkey all too well.
Right, it's like a monkey swinging from branch to branch.
My brain can be a 3-ring circus some days.
And all that mental chatter, it can be so draining.
Oh, yeah.
And definitely a big source of emotional turmoil.
For sure.
But the good news is that we can learn to tame that monkey.
Okay, how? Tell me how.
Well, Meurisse suggests mindful breathing.
Okay.
Just focusing on your breath can bring a sense of stillness.
Yeah.
And it lets you start to just observe those thoughts without getting carried away by them.
I like that, creating some space in your head.
Exactly, yeah.
It's really cool that Meurisse is also really open about his own struggles with negative thoughts and emotions.
Yeah.
He talks about feeling like he wasn't good enough for a long time and how he eventually let go of that belief.
It's refreshing to see someone be so honest about their own journey.
I agree. It makes all of this feel much more relatable. Okay, he did it. Maybe I can too.
Absolutely.
And then he introduces this formula for how emotions are formed.
Oh, right.
He calls it interpretation plus identification plus repetition equals strong emotion. What do you make of that formula?
Yeah, it really breaks it down. It simplifies a really complex process.
Yeah.
So interpretation, that's how we're looking at an event or even a thought.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always colored by our own experiences, and our beliefs.
Right, right.
Then identification, that's when we kind of get stuck in that emotion and it starts to feel like it's defining us.
Mm-hmm.
And then repetition, that's the constant replay in our heads.
Yeah.
And the more we repeat those thoughts and feelings, the stronger they become.
It's like we're carving those pathways deeper and deeper in our brains, right?
Exactly.
Making it harder to break free.
Right. But here's the good news.
Oh, good.
We can rewire those patterns.
Okay.
Meurisse actually gives us a whole bunch of techniques for dealing with negative emotions.
Oh, I like that.
Both for right now, in the moment, and then also for the long term.
So what's the difference there between the short-term and the long-term stuff?
Well, the short-term solutions, they're like a first aid kit for your emotions, you know? Things like if you're feeling down, go for a run, take a cold shower, anything to kind of shift your physical state.
Yeah.
Or, take action to deal with whatever is causing the emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Or even just like notice the emotion.
Yeah.
Be aware of it without judging it.
So it's all about interrupting that negative spiral in the moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the long-term solutions, those are about getting to the root of the problem,
Yeah.
So Meurisse talks about like analyzing the story you're telling yourself about the emotion,
Mm-hmm.
and then consciously choosing to shift away from negativity.
Yeah.
And then things like gratitude practices, meditation, that kind of stuff.
Right. So not just slapping a Band-Aid on it, but actually like healing the wound.
Exactly. Yeah.
What I really appreciate about Meurisse's approach is that he doesn't just focus on managing negative emotions.
Yeah,
He wants us to actually use those emotions for growth.
Right. He wants us to transform them.
Transform them. Yeah, that's the word.
Yeah. And he really dives into emotions like fear, resentment, even depression.
Yeah.
He sees them as opportunities for self-discovery,
I love that.
not enemies to be avoided.
Okay, so can you give me an example? Like, how can we transform fear, let's say, into something positive?
Oh, sure, yeah. So one of the key ideas in the book is this concept of fear-based actions versus love-based actions.
Okay.
Meurisse says, when we act out of fear, whether it's fear of failure, fear of rejection, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
we're coming from a place of lack, like we're trying to fill some kind of void inside.
Yeah.
But when we act from love for ourselves, love for others, love for what we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
our actions become so much more authentic and fulfilling.
So it's like shifting from I have to do this to I want to do this.
Exactly. And that shift can completely change your emotional experience.
I can see that.
Think about a time when you were excited about something, like a new project or a trip you were planning. You were probably coming from a place of love, right?
Uh-huh.
How did that feel?
Like I could conquer the world. So much energy.
Exactly. And that's what love-based action can do.
Yeah.
It fuels you, inspires you.
Okay, I'm sold. Love-based action, it is.
All right.
Now, what about resentment, though? Because that's something I think a lot of people struggle with.
Oh, resentment is tough.
Yeah.
But Meurisse has some really good advice on how to deal with it.
Okay.
He emphasizes the importance of forgiveness.
Yeah.
Forgiving ourselves and forgiving others.
Mm-hmm.
He reminds us that holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Oh, I like that. That's a good one.
It just doesn't work that way.
So true. We end up hurting ourselves the most
Exactly.
when we hang on to that anger and bitterness.
And what's interesting is that he connects resentment to self-love.
Oh, how so?
He says, when we forgive, we're choosing our own peace of mind.
Mm-hmm.
We're saying, I deserve to be free from this negativity.
It's not about letting the other person off the hook.
No, not at all.
It's about freeing ourselves.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly liberating.
Yeah.
And, Meurisse also has some really interesting things to say about depression.
Yeah.
He describes it as like an invitation to reconnect with the present moment.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, he's saying that depression often happens when we're stuck in our thoughts, either dwelling on the past or worrying about the future.
Right.
We lose touch with what's happening right here, right now.
Yeah.
And by bringing our attention back to the present moment,
Mm-hmm.
we can start to find some peace and clarity.
So it's about being mindful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Practices like meditation can help with that.
Uh-huh.
Or even just paying attention to your senses, what you see, hear, smell, taste, touch.
It's like grounding ourselves in reality.
Yeah, instead of getting lost in our heads.
It's so easy to do that, though.
It is. But with practice, we can become more present, more aware.
Okay, so as we're wrapping up our exploration of master your emotions here,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the key takeaways you think our listeners should really remember?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is this idea that we're not our emotions.
Yeah.
They're more like, visitors coming and going.
Right.
We don't have to let them take over.
Yeah, and once we understand how those emotions work, how they form, what influences them,
Right.
it gives us a sense of, like, control,
Absolutely.
Like, we're not just at the mercy of our feelings.
Yeah.
And that formula that Meurisse gives us for how emotions are formed, I keep going back to that.
Oh, yeah, it's so helpful.
Interpretation, identification, repetition, like recognizing those steps feels huge.
Yeah, it's like having a key to unlock the whole process.
Exactly. And then he gives us all these tools
Right.
for actually managing those emotions.
Yeah, both in the short term and the long term.
Like whether it's changing our physical state or trying to reframe our thoughts or practicing mindfulness. There are so many things we can do.
Absolutely.
And I love how he doesn't stop at just managing those negative emotions.
Right.
He wants us to use them.
To transform them.
Yeah, to transform them into something positive, to help us grow.
Like turning fear into courage.
Yeah.
Resentment into forgiveness.
And even depression into a deeper connection with the present moment.
Exactly.
It's so powerful.
Yeah, and I thought his exploration of fear-based versus love-based actions was really insightful.
Oh, me too.
It's so important to ask ourselves, like, what's motivating us?
Yeah.
Is it fear or is it love?
Because that can really change how we approach things.
It really can.
And even with forgiveness, which can be so hard.
Oh, it can be so tough.
Especially when we've been hurt.
Yeah.
But remembering that it's ultimately for our own peace of mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about the other person.
It's about taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, like we're reclaiming our own well-being.
Exactly.
So there's this other concept in the book that I think we should touch on.
Oh, okay. Which one?
Emotional accessibility.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
I don't think we really got into that.
No, we didn't.
So tell me more about that.
Okay, so basically Meurisse is saying that we can't just force ourselves to feel certain emotions. Like our emotional state is kind of like a filter.
Okay.
It determines which thoughts and feelings we're open to at any given time.
That makes sense.
So if you're trying to have a serious conversation with someone already angry,
Yeah.
it's probably not going to go very well.
Right, like the ground isn't fertile for that.
Exactly. So if we want to cultivate more positive emotions, we need to create the right environment internally.
Okay.
Taking care of our physical health, our mental health, practicing gratitude, surrounding ourselves with positive influences.
I like that. It's like preparing the soil.
Yeah.
So it's been so great to explore all of these ideas with you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
As we wrap up this deep dive into master your emotions, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think Meurisse's suggestion to keep an emotion journal is really valuable.
Oh, yeah.
Just taking the time to track your moods, notice any patterns.
Yeah.
It can help you become more aware of what triggers certain emotional responses.
It's like becoming a detective of your own inner world.
Exactly.
I love that.
And that self-knowledge is essential for mastering your emotions.
Well, this has been an incredible conversation. I feel like I have so much to think about now.
Me too. It's been a great discussion.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the world of emotions.
Yes, thank you.
Remember that mastering your emotions isn't about becoming some kind of emotionless robot.
Right.
It's about understanding those emotions, accepting them, and then using them to live a more fulfilling and authentic life.
Absolutely.
And if you're struggling, please remember that you're not alone. There's no shame in asking for help.
Yeah, good point.
Whether it's from a therapist or a coach or even a support group.
There are so many resources available.
So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep mastering those emotions.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Bye, everyone.